got a couple questions that we want you to fill in the chat. There's a comment and or a chat feature. And so we've got a couple questions that we would like for all of our participants today to fill out that chat feature. And we'd like to know your name and where are you from and how long have you lived in the Lansing area. So we're going to invite you to fill out that chat feature and come on in the room and join the family. And so we're going to have a great time today. And thank you for being a part of history. We're going to let a few more folks join, and then we're going to start our People's Assembly. So fill out that chat feature, and we want to say welcome to everyone. I'm looking through the chat here, and we've got members of our community that we have long-standing members of our community that have been around for a very long time, and so we're absolutely excited for today. Thank you for joining us. For 40 years, we've got those who've been around for 40 years, so we give you a high five and congratulations to you. And we've got those that have been around as recent as 7 years. So we have, looks like we have 3 years now. So if you're just joining us, please put in that chat feature your name, where you're from, and how long you have been a part of the Lansing, the greater Lansing area. 30 plus years, yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, I want to formally welcome everyone to Lansing's first People's Assembly. Our host organizations for today are One Love Global, Liberation PAC, and Black Lives Matter Lansing. My name is Sean Holland, and I'm a member of One Love Global and Black Lives Matter Lansing. And I will be your moderator today. We want to give a special thanks to our organizers and our facilitators who have stepped up to lead our various discussions in our breakout sessions. So we want to make sure you say thank you to them when you get into your breakout sessions. Our facilitators can be noted or identified by the asterisks in front of their names. And so again, this is Lansing's first People's Assembly. And the purpose of a People's Assembly is to galvanize the collective genius, voice, and power of citizens to address the pressing issues that impact their city. Just as a point of history, the People's Assembly model that we will be using today comes from the People's Advocacy Institution in Jackson, Mississippi. One of the first People's Assembly took place in Jackson, Mississippi in the 1960s. The Malcolm X grassroots movement in coalition with residents of Jackson and community groups assembled themselves to envision a new model of government controlled by the people. Jackson residents were asked, what kind of city do you envision? What can we do together to make Jackson a great place to live, work, and worship? Those People's Assemblies would ultimately transform the governance of their city. And so the purpose of today's assembly is to hear from the citizens of Greater Lansing, and we'll be asked to discuss current relationships with law enforcement, in the city and explore new ways of redefining policing and safety. We will work as a collective to develop solutions, strategies, action plans, and timelines to address critical social issues that impact our community. These people's assemblies, it is a collective. We are a collective, and it is the collective that determines the outcomes, not our elected officials. The People's Assembly become an entity that is not owned by any organization. This is a collective. And so again, we want to welcome you to our first Lansing People's Assembly. Angela, can you flip the slide? Thank you very much. Yep, so again, if you're joining us and you got in after 2 o'clock, please put it in the comments section, your name, where you're from, where you are from, and how long have you lived in the Lansing region. We have those that have been here for over 40 and as recent as 3 years. Next slide. Again, I'm Sean Holland. I am your moderator, and we have our host organization, BLM Lansing, One Love Global, and Liberation PAC. We also have, we know that normally your people's assemblies are held in person, but because of COVID-19, we are holding and hosting these discussions in this virtual space. So as a result, we have Sarah Gettle. You can look through the names and you will see tech. So if you're having tech issues throughout this assembly, please chat with Sarah, and we'll make sure we try to help you resolve your issues. And again, I'd like to say thank you to all of our facilitators. These facilitators are leaders from around our community, and they have volunteered to lead discussions on today. Next slide. So our purpose today, again, what is the People's Assembly and how will it benefit Lansing? We just covered that, and we have a slide that we'd like to put up, but after we go through that, Angela is going to lead us in our grounding by Black Lives Matter Lansing. We will have a warm-up question and/or questions, and then we'll break out into groups to have discussions around the various questions that you will be presented around public safety, et cetera, et cetera. You will have exactly 1 hour for those discussions, and there will be 2 facilitators per breakout sessions. After the hour, we will come back and we will report out our next steps. So again, thank you again for joining us. What is a People's Assembly? An ongoing process and a dedicated space, community-driven co-governance, democratize data and make information accessible, center those directly impacted, build our vision and priorities together, hold ourselves and elected officials accountable, taking action and delivering results. Our first assembly is focused on building a vision for collective safety. It is our first virtual assembly, so we invite grace as we fine-tune the technology. Next slide. So for our opening question, and you can fill that in the comment section, I want you to think about, think of the safest place you can imagine and what makes it safe. So think about that question. Think of the safest place you can imagine and what makes it safe. That's a loaded question. That's super open-ended. So that's our warm-up question, and fill out that comment section. Let's see what we have, and let's see what kind of comments we have. Let me look here. got nature, community connections, my home, everything I need. Yep. So we want you to continue to fill out the chat feature as we begin to think about what safety looks like and what it feels like to each of us. And I'd like to introduce Angela Waters Austin, president of One Love Global and Black Lives Matter Lansing, as well as Michigan. And Angela, at some point in your presentation, the first thing I saw this morning as I turned on the television was all of the highlights of John Lewis. And so I think it'd be great if we take just a moment of silence to honor the fallen heroes and all of our heroes who have been called home. So I'm going to introduce Angela Waters Austin, and she's going to take us forward in our grounding.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Lansing People's Assembly. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I first want to say that, we're in this moment in this country and around the world where racial equity and racism and white supremacy and really, for the first time, I think, a new energy around really examining our systems and structures and how they can work better for everyone. And that's true in our local community right here in Lansing. And this slide really is to ground us in understanding that for some people, this is a new conversation, but for many, including many of our systems leaders, this is a conversation that we have been in for the past 12 years and then some, because 2008 is actually when I started this work in Lansing, but there were many elders who have been promoting liberation and racial equity and anti-racism for decades, and we stand on their shoulders. So in 2008, Income Change Initiative was a systems and policy transformation initiative focused solely on improving the outcomes for boys and young men of color. I want to name that every systems leader in our region was a part of that initiative, from institutions including MSU to the city of Lansing. Then Chief Mark Alley served on that commission as well. We have continued a partnership with the Lansing Police Department throughout all of these initiatives. They have been present for each one of their chiefs who's been at the table. Chief Alley retired and moved on to another position, and Teresa Szymanski continued his role on the Income Change Initiative. And through the Lansing Early Childhood Equity Project, which is another community-wide collaborative that involved many institutional partners, from the health department to the community foundation, anchored by MSU, and us community folks at One Love Global in our grassroots organizing. That was the foundation for My Brother's Keeper when President Obama launched the initiative to improve outcomes for boys and young men of color, again with a focus on policy and systems change. Lansing was the second city in the country to say yes. Mayor Bonero didn't just come to the table with a yes, he came to the table with a plan because the community had already drafted the plan, and the mayor recruited the community to lead My Brother's Keeper. After a couple of years of building confidence in our team, there was a $100,000 line item allocated in the city budget to support that work. Black Lives Matter Lansing was born the same year after a fatal shooting by the Lansing Township Police, as our community was actually preparing the night before for a proactive conversation on excessive force and how we wanted to make sure that we did not have unnecessary police shootings and homicides in our community as we were seeing across the country. Unfortunately, our community changed overnight, and Black Lives Matter has been working to organize our community and to help us really understand what state violence means and how we end the war on Black people. In 2017, our community was invited by the Kellogg Foundation to apply for a grant and get involved in implementing a process called Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. We'll talk much more about that in just a minute. So the question is in 12 years, what have we learned? And why is reimagining public safety a priority right now? So we first looked at data. My Brother's Keeper is the slide that you're looking at. We are a data-driven community and organization, and we started by looking at the 6th milestone that Chief Yankowski actually took the leadership on. He was the anchor for this milestone in partnership with the Ingham County Health Department, who for the first time in the health department history made a commitment to concentrate resources and expertise on addressing violence as a public health issue. And we set a goal as a community of addressing what, once we saw it on paper, as you can see, 74% of the Black youth who were arrested in 2012 were Black youth, while they only represented less than 20% in the community. That we did see a change between 2012 and 2013 that really had no bearing, that our work had no bearing on because we hadn't actually begun this process yet. But what we did notice is that the unknown category grew. The percentages reduced in Black youth, but we begin to see an increase in the use of a category called unknown. And that is something that we absolutely need to pay attention to because it comes up in the 10-year racial profiling studies that Lansing Police has done. So Chief Yankowski provided us with 3 years of data that allowed us to see what our trends were looking like in terms of youth arrests. And you will see a tremendous jump during the time of his leadership between 2013, a little growth and a little increase in youth arrests across the board for 2014. And then in 2015, we see this tremendous leap in doubling the number of Black youth who were arrested. And the question is what could have happened in 2015 that could have had such a huge increase in the arrests of Black youth only? Was it policing practices? Was it the change in the national narrative? There's a number of factors that can contribute to that number, and that's something as a community that we really need to examine. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on budget today because our next session is going to be a deep dive into the budget. But I do want to point out today, because when we look at the arrest rate, who's targeted, and then we look at the kind of services that our city budget affords, we'll see 21% of that budget is invested in policing. But if you look at things like parks and recreation, human services and agency supports, the kind of resource, neighborhood and citizen engagement zero, the kind of resources that our young people need the most are not prioritized in the budget. So Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation is a process to engage our entire region in racial equity and healing. And we've been in this process for now starting our 4th year. And it's been really understanding our community, understanding history, and building the kind of relationships that actually allowed us to show up here together today. Many of our facilitators have been a part of the Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation process, or even work that preceded that. So it's important for us to make sure that we have some historians in this work that can carry it forward. So our goal is that through truth and recognition of our history, how we got where we are, that we can actually work towards equitable policy solutions and new ways of being in relationship with one another. And you can find out more about that at trhtlansing.org. So the history of policing, it's really important to understand. And this is one of the things that I really appreciated about Chief Yankowski, because he did his homework. And we actually went to DC to a meeting of chiefs and sheriffs from across the country. And we really talked about the culture. And so community and law enforcement really understanding what we're working against. And this history of policing that began as the Slave Patrol, and you can see that this came from the National Law Enforcement Museum, this oath that I swear that I will search for guns, swords, and other weapons among slaves in my district, and essentially make sure that property, which was Black people at that time, was returned to their owners should they manage to actually take a move for freedom. In modern policing, we still continue the undercurrents of property and people being property are still very much the culture of policing. And when I say policing, I mean the entire law system. Because it's not just police, it's prosecutors, it's judges, it's the entire carceral system that is largely fed by racial capitalism, and that policing is done in Black communities and brown communities, and then the resources to confine, to judge, actually are in the rural surrounding areas. So in many ways, it is the criminalization of Black people that actually provides jobs for other people. And that prison industrial complex banks on being fed people so that it can continue to grow. And actually, the 13th Amendment says that slavery is abolished except in instances of incarceration. And right now, we have people who are incarcerated who are once again enslaved for free labor. And how do we continue to perpetuate this? We call it the school to prison pipeline. And as we learned with the Lansing Early Childhood Equity Project, it starts as early as preschool, when Black boys are suspended and expelled from preschools at a much higher rate than all other children. Not only are we building this entire industrial complex, prison industrial complex, but it is becoming increasingly militarized. And as of yesterday, we see federal law enforcement being sent into cities, and the increase of military equipment to local law enforcement agencies to be in relationship with its people, and taking on a very different posture. So when we talk about racial healing, what do we mean? We mean stopping the harm. We're in a conversation about transforming what public safety looks like, and we are still having a debate about whether or not people deserve to be murdered by police, whether they're armed, unarmed, and under what circumstances. And that means that we actually have to be accountable for the harm that's caused. And we have to go the extra mile of repairing that harm. So when we get a call from the White House to dominate protesters, this is what it looks like all around the country. We don't necessarily see it in our community. We had a moment here, and it was disturbing for peaceful protesters to be gassed by police. It could be a whole lot worse, and it is a lot worse, and police have unfortunately murdered a protester, and protesters are being snatched off of the street by people in unknown garb who look like military. We don't know if they are white supremacists, militias. Are they actually law enforcement? We don't know, but people are being picked up off of the street for protesting and disappeared. So what does the transformation look like? It means taking cops out of schools. It means being accountable for the harm that police, actually inviting police into this process of accountability for their behaviors. The more that we see it on camera, it's in our news feeds, it's on television, and we cannot pretend like it doesn't exist. And we actually have to have radical change. And we use Angela Davis's definition of radical, meaning grasping at the root, really understanding the root causes of a racial hierarchy and how policing actually has been used as a tool to maintain that racial hierarchy. I want to acknowledge and thank Ingham County Health Department and Board of Commissioners for the resolution to declare racism a public health emergency. It is indeed an emergency. And that's why we're having a conversation about what defunding or divesting looks like. And it means that if we want to invest in things like neighborhood engagement, it has to come from somewhere. So how does our budget begin to match our values? And then how do we actually monitor and actually collect data and share that data across our community in ways that are easily understandable so that we can be accountable, not just for doing the work, but for actually delivering the results. So our vision is a beloved community, a community where the conditions that create crime and violence are no longer present. Police don't have to go on calls that they're not equipped to go on. Chief Yankowski used to always say that so many of their calls were due to poverty and neglect and just people's need for health care and mental health care, and that we really needed to make these kind of investments in our community, especially with our young people. We envision a beloved community where outcomes can no longer be predicted by race, where racial hierarchy is no longer the norm, where everyone feels welcome and where everyone feels safe. That is the end of my portion. Thank you. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Angela. At this time, we're going to ask Crystal Dunn if she would lead us in our community agreements for as we navigate through this space in our next moments together. Crystal?
Hi, thank you guys. Thank you for attending, and I am going to read through the community agreements. If you guys could either raise your hand or comment in the chat at the end, if you guys can agree to these community agreements as we move forward in our dialogue, so that we are creating a safe space and a place of inclusion so that everyone may share their thoughts. So if you could please read along with me. As a member in or a supporter of Lansing community, I agree to make a conscious commitment to honor the following agreements. 1, respect. Respect the rights of others to hold opinions and beliefs that differ from your own. When you disagree, challenge / critic the idea, not the person. 2, affect. Practice intentional listening. Let your comments, requests for clarification, critiques reflect that you have paid attention to the comments made by the person who spoke before you. 3, inclusion. Take space, make space. Be mindful of others. Share responsibly. If you have much to say, try to hold back a bit. If you are hesitant to speak, look for opportunities to contribute to the discussion. 4, grace. Recognize that we are all learning. We are also learning. Be willing to change your perspective and make space for others to do the same. 5, sanctuary. Create a safe space for sharing. Keep personal stories that people share confidential. Remember to always be guided by and offer contributions that are rooted in and come from our desire to improve our beloved community of Lansing. So if you guys can, within the chat, if you can either acknowledge the agreement and try to honor it during our dialogues. All right. It looks like most of our attendants have responded. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. And you will automatically be placed in a breakout session. And so we want to thank you for joining us, and let's lean in and lean out. So thank you very much. You have 1 hour for this discussion, and thank you to the facilitators who will be leading these discussions.
As you are being moved into your breakout groups, just want you to take a look at the questions. You're going to have an hour, and on your screen is a little guide to help you with controls so that you can participate fully once you get into your group. These questions will be repeated in your group, so no need to write them down or try to commit them to memory. We will see you back in an hour. Thank you.